Kachina in a tank. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, your eyes are not deceiving you. This is the feature creep that we've always wanted. So, let's talk a bit about feature creep and power creep in Genshin Impact now that 5.0 is out. And this is something I think a lot of us can sympathize with because Hoyo is essentially currently in a catch-22 situation. If they don't innovate, if they don't make it exciting for you to come back and play Genshin Impact, then obviously people are going to leave and go to the competition. But the downside is, in order to be exciting, they have to introduce new features and new ways of playing, which can quite honestly feature creep and power creep the old ways. So a good example, for instance, would be someone like Farina. She can walk infinitely on water. She's got an underwater exploration passive ability which aids in combat. She's got 2 outfits. She can heal, she can buff, she can do off-field hydro with a lot of off-field like damage as well. It's really quite scary what Hoyo did with a character like Farina, and you could argue whether that is healthy or not for the game. Now obviously when it came to Natlan, they had to get some sort of new gimmick, which is the Night Soul state, and in a certain sense I like the fact that the movement is very much confined to Natlan, so you can't really drive around with Kachina outside of Natlan unless you know how, like you're in the background footage. But obviously, ordinarily, under normal circumstances, the game is balanced that you get the benefit in a region, and outside the region, you don't get the benefits. And I think that is the direction that I like Hoyo is taking, and it's much better to give characters features that are relevant to the region, because once you play the region and you're not done with the region or you go back to an older region, you kind of lose out. So there is a give and a take and it feels fair, but where it starts feeling a bit unfair is when it comes to the combat. So this is the part which always has me worried. You live in a world where suddenly you have to manage Sichuan's bubbles with Yai Miko's E ability, and you're counting like all the aggravate hits very, very carefully, and then Mualani comes and she just does vaporize damage for 400k, and you wonder what the point of it all was. It's just crazy how a character like Mualani literally just power creeps everything. And certainly from okay, we kind of need to censor naked Mualani here. Sorry for that. I don't know how this got into editing. You certainly don't want to see the uncensored version on Twitter. Alright, so this is better. So yeah, talking a bit about Shark Girl right here. She is quite fun to play with, and as you can see in the background footage, it's just the combination of movement, even in combat. It's really smooth, it's fluid, it's exciting, it's different, and this is what we talked about in the beginning. A character like this, and for instance like Kachina that can climb on walls, and all the other characters coming out, make the game feel honestly quite fresh. And this is something that you then start thinking of, but hey, couldn't Hoyo have created a special mode here on Watatsumi Island, and then I could like wave ride a jellyfish with Kokomi going and like surfing with like, as you can see as I'm going through the waterfalls. It would be so cool, it would be so different, it would be so fresh. And this is the thing that I think the game kind of misses with the how can you put it? With the drive for Hoyo to continuously make profit, it's awesome to see that they're innovating and they're trying in the face of their competition to like give us some form of innovation. But what is quite sad about all of this is that a lot of the older characters are quite frankly just left behind. And this is where I think Hoyo could seriously just go and perhaps rework regions. So imagine you go to Mondstadt and you already completed 90% of the region. Well, in this case, no amount of character exploration abilities are really going to offer you anything, so why not put in a mount or like a cart or a tank that you can just drive through Mondstadt at a great speed. This is such a nice way of like coming, sitting down, relaxing, and it's the same that I would argue for something like Inazuma. After you've, let's say, cleared Watatsumi Island 90%, allow Kokomi specifically, or let's say the Traveler or some other character, a gimmick where they can then freely or more easily travel just in that area. And in this way, what you could do is, rather than worrying that new characters are always going to take away from all the characters or whatever, where you can have some sort of gimmick, some sort of end game for each old character that could then like benefit them. I could easily imagine a situation where, let's say you've completed all the quests on Inazuma, then a special mode unlocks with the Raiden Shogun, or there's suddenly a buff to all Inazuma characters provided they only stay in Inazuma. Just something like that, something where you can add more features without it really affecting the overall game balance. That to me would be really, really awesome. And it's the sort of thing that once you look at the background footage here with Kachina and Mualani, that you really start to kind of notice the cracks in Hoyo's current game design and how much better things could be. Now let's move on to the topic of power creep in Genshin Impact, which is the other part of this video. So currently what I'm really afraid of is not so much that one new character is going to replace an older character by virtue of doing more damage, but the fact that with the rise of new features and more bloated kits that we're seeing in Genshin Impact, that you're going to have a situation where the interaction between different characters might actually make an old character obsolete, or just might make their older teams not as competitive, mostly due to the fact that Hoyo doesn't design their combat to be specific. So for instance, if you had a combat scenario where all enemies are given pyro immunity, you can't apply pyro in any way, you start the chamber with 0 elemental burst energy, and you have a target to beat 30 mobs in a row with lots of low health, then suddenly characters like Bennett, Xiangling, Nahida all really start falling out of favor just by pure necessity, and you can then start encouraging other teams. And obviously this will also go the other way around. You'll later on introduce stage effects where enemies can't be frozen, or let's say you have a special abyss effect where the Night Soul Blessing doesn't take into effect, etc, etc. You could make 100 different ways of engaging with the combat, and that in of itself can then necessitate a lot of different teams to be played. But Genshin is not really quite going down that route, and I think the downside of this is that what you then end up with is a case where people spend money to get characters, a new character comes along, and for the same amount of money spent, then you can just get way much more on the new character, hence new players benefit more disproportionately, although some people do take issue with this argument. From me, and from my perspective at least, as someone that's gotten a lot of C6 characters in the game, it does feel quite insane that the level of output that you're used to can be replicated by a C0 Kachina just using a simple Klee and a Sucrose, and then boom, you can like beat the PMA faster, or even in a very competitive manner, to some C6 older 5-star characters. Now, some people might argue that because the game has been out so long, it's no wonder that if you already have something like a C2 Raiden, that if Hoyo doesn't power creep and give you a strong new unit at C0, then you'll have less reason to pull on it. And this is also perhaps another conundrum of the game balance. But certainly from my perspective, we can see from a feature and power creep perspective that things have gone quite like things are very, very bloated, and I do fear for the fact that the game in of itself might actually get into an unhealthy state where Koya gets the profits now and they release broken characters now, and in the future this just means that all the units are not going to sell as well, and even the latest units might not sell because there's always going to then be that expectation of feature creep, of power creep, and if you don't deliver on it, for instance, a good example would be a character like Citron, which was really, really nicely balanced for the way Genshin was in like 2.0, 2.3, 2.0 to 3.0 era. When you release a character like that, everyone's suddenly like, nah, what's the point? And this is the interesting catch-22 situation that we have. If Hoyo doesn't innovate, then obviously players are just going to go to Wuwa or to some other competitive games, or even go to another Hoyo game like Xenoblade Zone Zero, etc, etc. But ultimately what it's going to boil down to is that they're going to lose out. And from my personal perspective, Hoyo dug this hole. They definitely chose not to do proper testing. For instance, we saw this with New Valette and the Spin to Win and many of the gimmicks like you can see that I pulled off in the background. Hoyo hasn't done a good job with the game balance, and honestly I do think that what they're trying to do now is stall as much as they can, and I think they stalled quite a long time in terms of withholding features and like quality of life from Genshin Impact, and what they're really now trying to do is just extract as much profit whilst building out their catalog of games that they can then push out into the market. Unfortunately, I do think from my personal perspective, from a business sense, they might run up more cost than than profits that they might get in the future, and it's going to be interesting to see how that might actually eat into Hoyo's bottom line. Certainly an interesting prediction from my side, but in any case, that's enough yapping. Thanks for watching and hope you've enjoyed the background footage. Cheers.